Okay, folks, here we go. We're going to set up garden dice. First thing we're going to do to set up garden dice is place the board out. Okay. Now we're going to place these 4 dice off to the side of the board where everybody can reach them. Okay. Okay, next we're going to place out our veggie tiles. Okay, now these tiles are double-sided, one side depicting the plant, the other side depicting seeds. I'm going to leave them out face up with the plant, just so you can identify each different tile. Okay, there are 5 different types of these tiles, and there are 10 tiles of each vegetable. Okay, now depending on the player count, we're going to have to modify the stack of each vegetable. Okay, now in a 4-player game, we're going to use all 10 of the tiles for each vegetable. In a 3-player game, we will remove 3 of these tiles of each type, leaving 7 each of each vegetable. Okay. So for a 4-player game, we use 10 tiles. For a 3-player game, we only use 7 tiles. In a 2-player game, we will only use 5 tiles of each vegetable. Okay? So once we have removed any unnecessary tiles, depending on the player count, we will take those extra tiles, okay, and we'll place them in the box. They will not be used for the game. Okay, next, we will give each player one of these double-sided player aid boards. Okay. We will return any unused boards to the box. They won't be used. Okay, next we're going to hand each player their playing pieces. Okay, each player will receive 9 of these ownership discs, what I call them. Okay, they come in 4 different colors, green, yellow, red, and blue. Okay. They will also receive 1 of these scarecrow / sundial tiles, 1 of these rabbit / bird tiles, 1 of these sun tiles, and the game also comes with a built-in expansion, the gnome tiles. Okay, each player will receive all of these, and then also in a 2-player game, each player will receive 1 of these rock tokens. Okay. So we give each player all of these tokens and their ownership discs. Okay, any unused player tokens and ownership discs will be returned to the box. They will not be used for this game. Okay, next step for setup is each player will place 1 of their ownership discs here on the path leading to the garden. And then finally, you will randomly select the first player, give them the 4 dice, and you are ready to play garden dice. Alright, in garden dice, we are gardeners sharing a plot of land, and we are trying to grow the best crops. At the end of the game, when all the seeds are bought, the player with the most victory points will win the game. Let's look at the board before we get into the actual gameplay. Okay, now as we can see, around the perimeter of the board, we have the scoring track. Now, the board itself is like a giant grid. Okay, it's broken up into coordinates, represented by pips on the die. Okay, so from the top left, we have 1, 1, and then we go all the way over to 1, 6, and then that will continue down to 6, 6, respectively. Okay, it's a giant map, basically, with coordinates. Okay, now we have these stars here, which are special spots on the board where a player can gain twice the amount of victory points they would normally get from a harvested vegetable. Now, if we look at the vegetable tiles here, we can see that one side has the actual vegetable, and then the other side has a seed symbol on it. Okay, when normally during setup, the seeds are faced up, but I just flip them over so that people can identify them on the camera. Okay. Now, up in the top left corner of the seed or vegetable face of the tile, there's a number. And this represents how much it costs in die pips in order to manipulate that tile, whether it be to buy, water, or to harvest that tile. Now, on the player's turn, first thing the player's going to do is roll their dice here, okay? And these will dictate the actions that a player could take each round. Now, if a player rolls all 4 dice the same number, like this case we have 4 6s, the player can choose to re-roll if they want to. I think it would be more advantageous if, like, say, it was all 2s, but you get the idea. Okay? These ownership discs here, is what I call them, are needed to place any tile on the board. Okay? If you do not have any ownership disc left, say you were buying seeds throughout the game, okay, and when you do that, you have to place an ownership disc on the tile. If you do not have any left, you cannot buy any more seeds or place any tiles out on the board. Okay, such as the rabbit and the bird and all that. And we'll get into that in a little bit later on, but just want to clear that up in case I forget throughout this. Okay, the first thing a player is going to do is they're going to take these 4 action dice, they're going to give them a roll, and that'll tell them what kind of actions they could do during that turn. Okay, now one action a player can do is to buy one of these seeds. Okay, they actually could buy as many seeds as they want to, as long as they have the dice to pay for them. However, there's a caveat that you cannot buy more than 2 of one type of seed. Okay, so we could buy like 2 eggplant and then 1 tomato and 1 squash if we had the dice that allow us to do it. But we cannot buy more than 2 of one type of seed on any given turn. Okay, so to buy a seed, first thing we'll do is take dice that are equal to or higher than the value of the seed. Okay, so here we have an eggplant. In the top left corner of the seed tile, we can see a 5. So the eggplants cost 5. We could buy an eggplant with a die with a face of 5 or higher, 6. Okay. Likewise, if we chose to buy a squash, we could do the same thing with any die out there pretty much. We could buy one with a value of 5 if we want to. It's kind of wasteful, but we could do it. Or we could buy one with a value of 2 or, 1, whatever. Okay, so that's the first action you could do, is buy a seed. Okay, now when you buy a seed, you're going to place one of your ownership discs on that seed tile and then place it out in front of your play area here. Okay, so we bought that with this 5 die. Place that off to the side so we use it. Okay, now another action a player can do is to plant the seed. If we look at the edges of the fence here, we can see there's die numbers on there. Okay, like I said, it's a coordinate. We would take 2 dice and we would find the spot that these 2 dice meet up at, so 4, 4, and we could plant a seed there. Alternatively, we could do it with the 4, 2. Okay, if we did it with the 4, 2, we would go 4, 2, or we could go down here at 4, 2. Okay, so once we've decided to do that, we can then plant the seed. Okay, now say this wasn't a 4, say this one was a 5. Okay, another action we can do is to water our seeds and turn them into vegetables. Okay, so we would simply flip the tile over, showing that it is a vegetable, as long as we had a die equal to or greater than the number on the tile. Okay, and then we would just place our ownership disc back on it. Okay, now let's say that there were more seeds out later on in the game. Okay, and we went to water our eggplant here with a die of 5 or greater. Okay, when you water seeds and there are seeds next to it of lower value, they would all be watered at once. This is called chaining. Okay, so we spent a die of 5 or greater to water our eggplant die, which would flip it around to turn it into a vegetable. That would now chain down for any seed with a value of 5 or less. So here we can see we have a tomato plant worth 3. That would also be watered, turn it into a vegetable. And then next to that we have a carrot with a value of 2, which is lower than 3, so that would be flipped over and turned into a vegetable also. Okay, now over here the yellow player has a squash seed, which is lower than 2, it's a value of 1, that will also be flipped over and turned into a vegetable. Okay, so when you order seeds and it changes down, it doesn't necessarily have to be your seeds that will get ordered too. It could be anybody on the board. Okay, and then finally over here we have some artichoke, which is a value of 4, which is lower than this eggplant here. That would also get ordered. Okay, now say down here we had another eggplant. This would not get chained because this is greater than the 4. Okay, the value of the eggplant is a 5, not a 4, so the chain would stop here. Another action a player can take is to harvest a plant. Okay, as we can see here, the eggplant is still a value of 5. We have a die that has a value of 5, so we can harvest these plants. Alright, all we do to do that is simply remove our ownership die and then take the tile and place it in our play area off to the side, showing that we have harvested the plant. We're going to keep these because at the end of the game we can score depending on different combinations of plants we have. Okay, and then we will award ourselves the points that the plant has. Okay, in this case the eggplant has a point value of 5, the tomato 3, carrot 2, squash 1, and so forth. Okay, so we would place the tile and off to the side in our play area and give ourselves 5 points on the scoreboard. Now harvesting also chains off like ordering does. So we harvested the eggplant here. We would also harvest this tomato here, giving ourselves an additional 3 points. This carrot here, giving us another 3 points, or 2 points. And as you can see here, even though the yellow player owns this squash, they would still be able to harvest it, giving them 1 point in this case. And since it was harvested during one of our chains, we will get 1 point. Okay, we'll get 1 point for every tile that belongs to another player. Okay, so we get 1 more point. Then the yellow player would take their tile, place it off to the side, showing that they harvest it and take their ownership disc back. Okay, and then finally over here we have the artichoke. We get another 4 points. Okay, and again, since the eggplant here was greater than the artichoke, which was 4, we would not harvest that. Okay, now any vegetables harvested in this area here with these 6 stars on them, okay, they're worth double the amount of points normally given. So here we have an eggplant worth a value of 5. When it's harvested, being that it's in one of these spaces with the stars on it, it is now worth double that, which is 10. So the player would receive 10 points. Now if there was a chain harvesting here, okay, the player who harvested it would get double the points, but if there's another player that gets harvested due to a chain, they would still only receive 1 point. They wouldn't receive 2 points because of the star. Okay, and then again, player would take their tile and their ownership token, and place it in their play area, showing that they harvested a tile and they got the points. Okay, so they are the 4 basic actions. Okay, now there are some additional actions. As I said in the beginning of the game, each player will have these tokens here. Okay, now the sun token will allow you to discard the token and change the value of 1 die to any value you want to. Okay, now at the end of the game, if you still have the sun token, you get an additional 5 points. If you have discarded it to change the value of a die, then you will not get that bonus at the end of the game. Okay, once you discard it, you return it to the box. It's no longer used the rest of the game. Okay, so first we'll go with the bird. First thing we do with the bird is we place it on the board. Just like any other vegetable seed when you're planting it. You would take 2 dice, find the coordinates. So say we used the 5-4 here, and we place the bird at 5-4. Okay, now birds would eat an opponent's seeds. Okay, not the vegetables, just the seeds. Now once you place your bird on the board, you would place an ownership token on it, claiming that bird, saying that the bird is yours. Now a bird will move around the board eating opponent's seeds. Okay, now to do this, a player will spend a die, and the bird can move in a straight, unobstructed line of that die value or less. Okay, so here we have a 6. The bird can move in a orthogonal line, okay, not diagonal, up to a value of 6. So the bird could go 1, 2, or you could go down here 1, come over here, but as soon as a bird hits a vegetable, he has to stop. Okay, a bird cannot move through a vegetable. They have to stop once they hit a vegetable. Okay, or since we wants to target an opponent's seed, he can move up here, 1, 2. Okay, now once a bird stops at an opponent's seed, that seed would get, pushed off the space, and the player using the bird has 2 options to make here. First option is to simply eat the seed, okay, in which case the opponent would take their ownership disc, place it back in their stockpile there, and the seed tile would get discarded from the board. Okay. Now the other option the player has is to cough up the seed, I think is what they call it. So basically they could steal the seed off of their opponent. Okay, the player has to spend a die of the seed value or greater. Okay, so in this case the carrot seed here is worth 2. They spend a die worth 3. The player could then steal that seed and place it in their play area, okay, with their ownership marker on the seed. Okay, now once they do that, they have to take another ownership marker and place it on the bird, showing that they stole that seed, basically. Okay, and the opponent's ownership marker would be sent back to their pool. Now you can only do this if you have enough ownership markers to cover the seed and the bird. Okay, so if you only had 1 ownership marker left, you could not do that because you'd have to place 1 ownership marker on the seed and 1 on the bird. You need 2 ownership markers. So you don't have 2, you only had 1, you couldn't do that. Say the green player here sees that their opponent has this bird out. He's worried about his seeds. So now a player could place a scarecrow in their garden. Okay. To do this, you would do it the same as playing a seed. You need 2 dice. So here we have 2, 4. We place the scarecrow there. And then we would place one of our ownership markers there, showing that that scarecrow is ours. Now the scarecrow will protect the 8 seeds that surround the scarecrow from the bird. Okay. So if a player moves the bird, he'd have to go up here and stop. He cannot eat the seed because it's protected by the scarecrow. Say later on, these seeds are, getting ready to get harvested here. They were watered, and they're now ready to be harvested. Okay. And say we had an opponent here who had a seed in here. Okay, opponents can plant their seeds and then water them and whatnot there, just like any normal, watering and harvesting chain. Okay. Say we had this example here, and a player used a die to start harvesting the seeds here. Okay, they will still chain like normal harvesting, but being that they're planted next to the scarecrow and the 8 spots surrounding it, orthogonally and diagonally, these seeds would now be worth 3 additional points. Okay, so here we get 6 points for this tomato instead of 3 points, 5 points here for the carrot instead of 2 points. Now, an opponent's seed would still be harvested, and you would still get 1 additional point for it, but not the 3 points. Okay, and then the opponent would still get whatever the value of the seed is, but they would not receive the bonus because it's your scarecrow and not theirs. Now you cannot combine the scarecrow bonus of 3 points for each seed with the star spots here on the board. The scarecrow cancels out the star spaces. Okay, so you could not receive both of the bonuses, you would only receive the 3 additional points for the Scarecrow. Say this player still had this bird out here, but there's a bunch of vegetables here, so the bird's kind of useless. You can't eat any of the seeds. What the player can do is, if he rolls at 6, they can flip the bird over to the rabbit. Okay? Same thing with the Scarecrow. Okay, if we want to change it from the Scarecrow to the sundial, spend a 6, and it would become the sundial. Okay, and then later on you can spend a die of 6 and flip it back. Okay, now the rabbit works similar to the bird, where you spend a die to move it in a straight line. Okay, but instead of eating seeds, now the rabbit eats vegetables. Okay, and the rabbit's the same thing. When you come to a vegetable of an opponent, you knock it out of there, and then you give the opponent player their ownership disc back, and then you have the decision to either discard the tile from the game or steal it, turning it into a seed, place it in front of your play area there, placing a ownership marker on it, and later on you could plant that seed, and then put an additional ownership marker on the rabbit showing that he ate the seed, or the vegetable in this case. The Scarecrow here does not protect vegetables from the rabbits, only seeds from the bird. So now we got the sundial here. Flip this guy over. If you plant the sundial out on the board, the sundial will allow you to change the value of the die up to 2 pips. Okay, either you could subtract or add them. Okay, and you can only use this while you are planting. Okay, they call it coordinating. All right, so say here we wanted to plant a tomato seed here. Okay, and we wanted to get it, let's say here at 6-6, but we don't have 6-6. We only have 6-5. Okay, if we had the sundial, every turn we could change the die value up to 2 pips on either 1 or 2 die. Okay, we could either change 1 die, let's say the 4 here, up to 2. Okay, or we could change, again, we'll go back to 4. We could change 2 dice a value of 1. Okay, and then we could plant the seed here. Okay, or we could place the rabbit or the sundial or the bird or whatever. Okay, it's only used for what they call the coordinating. Okay, when you're using 2 dice to place a token or tile in a space on the board. Next we have the gnomes. Okay, as you can see, each player has a gnome in their color. It's a built-in expansion of the game. Alright, now you would place a gnome just like placing any other tile. You would use 2 dice and, place it on the board. Okay, now once you place it on the board, you have to put one of your ownership markers on it. Okay, and you must have an ownership marker in order to play the gnome, or any tile for that matter. Okay, now the gnome works similarly to the sundial, where it'll give you the opportunity to change pips on dice. Okay, but instead of using it for placing the tile like the sundial does, you would use the gnome for either buying tiles, ordering tiles, or harvesting tiles. Every turn, once the gnome is out, you could change the die value of either 1 or 2 dice, either 1 or 2 pips. Okay, if you use 1 die, you could change the value of the die up to 2 pips, either subtracting or adding. Okay, so in this case we subtract it. Or if you had 2 dice, you could use it to change the value 1 pip each. Okay, so here we added 1 pip to each die. Now, the gnome has a special ability where you can choose to add or subtract up to 3 imaginary pips on dice. Okay, but this comes at a penalty. In order to use 3 pips on the dice, you would have to flip the gnome over to its inactive side. Okay, so the little hat here is its inactive side. The full gnome here is the active side. Okay, you flip the gnome over to its inactive side, Place your marker back on it. And now you have the opportunity to use 3 dice, 3 pips on up to 3 dice. Okay, you can use 1 die and add or subtract 1 pip on each die, or you could use up to 3 pips on 1 die, either adding and subtracting. So say we turn this 3 into a 6 here. Okay, we use 3 pips on 1 die. Okay, now to flip this guy back over to the active side, we'd have to spend a die value of 6. Okay, and then we could flip it back over to the active side. Okay, now there is a special rule with the hexagon or the octagon tiles here. Okay, we cannot have a sundial and a gnome out at the same time, or a scarecrow and a gnome. It's one or the other. Now, at any time during the game, you could choose to remove one of these critters or the sundials or whatever. Okay, in order to do this, you would have to use 2 dice that equal to the coordinates. So say we want to remove the sundial here. Okay, so we use a 4-2. Okay, that equals to the coordinates. And then we have to spend an additional die with a value of 6. And we can remove that tile from the board. Okay, say we needed the ownership disc. Okay, remember, without the ownership disc, we can't buy seeds or plant seeds or stuff like that. The final type of tile is only used in a 2-player game, and that is the rock tile. Okay, to use a rock tile, you would place it like any normal tile in the game. You would use 2 dice, figure out the coordinates that you want to place it in, and then place it there. Okay, rock tiles, however, do not need an ownership disc. Okay, and rock tiles are permanent. They cannot be removed from the board, like the rabbits and the birds and the scarecrows and all that kind. Okay, a rock is simply there to take up a space, basically. It'll prevent critters like the rabbit here from passing through. Okay, and it'll take up a space that you or an opponent cannot place a tile in, whether it be vegetable or a critter. 30 actions. Once you decide which actions you want to do with your 4 dice, and place all your tiles or your harvest them or whatever it may be, player will pass on to the next player. Okay, and it'll continue like this until the last tile, the last seed tile, has been bought. Okay, once that happens, the player who bought the tile, let's say it is the yellow player here, the yellow player will be able to finish out their actions for that turn, and then the game will end. And then you go into scoring. Okay, so now we get into scoring. If a player still has their sun token at the end of the game, they receive 5 points. Okay, so we'll say the green player is doing this one. Okay, 5 points. For each set of the 5 different types of vegetables you have, you receive 15 points. So we have 15 here because we have 1 set, and then 15 here for another set, gives us 30 points. Okay. For every set of 5 of a kind or greater, we would receive 20 points. So here we have 5 eggplants, the player gets 20 points. Okay, for every 4 of a kind a player has, a player would receive 15 points. Now for every 3 of a kind a player has, a player will receive 10 points. Okay, and they can be used multiple times. Like here we have 5 of a kind, which is part of this one of each different type of tile, vegetable tiles. Okay, so we can use them in combination. Simply add up the score. Whoever has the most points wins the game. And that is how you play garden dice.